Welcome to the Spider-Verse Minute, the tri-weekly podcast where we watch Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse 1 minute at a time. I'm Sean Slater.
And I'm his sister Caroline.
Today we're going to be watching minute 1 of the movie, and the minute begins with the Sony logo appearing on the screen and ends with the Comic Code Authority logo appearing on the screen.
I do want to share what I nicknamed this minute. For our listeners, I've nicknamed all of the minutes, so I'm going to share it with each time. I have nicknamed this one Logos. Super clever, I know.
It does end pretty much perfectly on the end of the Comic Code Authority logo, and I feel like they designed it specifically for us.
It does seem like destiny. It was very satisfying when the clip would end, and I'm like, ooh, how nice.
So the first logo that appears is the Sony logo. This is a movie produced by Sony Studios.
Shocking.
They're the ones that still have the movie rights to Spider-Man, even though he is a Marvel property. In the 90s, I forget what year it was. I think it was like 98. Marvel was close to bankruptcy, so they sold off a bunch of their properties, and Sony had the option of buying like almost all of them, and they decided to just go with the Spider-Man and like some of his related characters.
Affiliations.
Yeah. Which is why they still haven't.
It seems to have been working out for them. They've been making serious bank.
Yes and no. So far they've rebooted him pretty much 3 times in the past, since they've had it. You have the Sam Raimi
right.
Spider-Mans with
Tobey Maguire.
Yeah, with Tobey Maguire.
The My Spider-Man, the one I grew up with.
Yeah, those are the ones. I watched those out of order, I'm pretty sure. I think I saw 1, 3, and 2, and so I really have no idea what happens in those movies. I definitely need to go back and see them.
I think I went like 3, 1, 2. I remember seeing the third one first and being like very confused for a while.
I distinctly remember watching the one with the Green Goblin when we were on vacation in the Midwest somewhere.
Yes.
In like the cabin we were staying in.
The dance sequence is forever ingrained in my mind.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was the funniest thing.
And then you had the rebooted version after Spider-Man 3, The Amazing Spider-Man
Andrew Garfield,
yeah. And they only got 2 of those movies out.
He seems to be a controversial Spider-Man. Like, some people really liked him.
I enjoyed him. I felt like he was a better Spider-Man than Peter.
Yeah, we seem to agree on that. I enjoyed him more as, like, actual Spider-Man than I did as Peter Parker, mostly because I always thought Peter was very dorky, and he seemed too cool to be Peter.
Yeah, I didn't mind him being, like, as cool, but yeah, he definitely, like, he had the vibe of Peter down. And then in 2017, you had Spider-Man Homecoming come out as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and with Tom Holland as the main Spider-Man there. And people were starting to get like, oh, not another Spider-Man again. But with that one, I remember when it was first announced and we didn't know who the movie was announced before the actor was. I was really hoping for Miles Morales.
I remember we talked about it. You were hoping for, it's like, oh, maybe they'll reboot it with Miles.
Yeah.
I remember not really caring because I was just kind of Spider-Man'd out. It's like, ugh, another Spider-Man movie. I really didn't care. Then he was revealed in Civil War, and I'm like, okay, now I'm kind of interested.
Well, yeah, I guess when they announced that Spider-Man was going to be in Civil War, that was when I was like, oh, is this what we're going to... Or, who's it gonna be?
I was definitely curious. I didn't see Homecoming, so confession there. But from what I've heard, the consensus seems to be that Tom Holland is the best of the 3. He seems to be a good balance of Peter Parker and Spider-Man.
He plays like the good, dorky enough, and like part of the issue with, quote unquote issue with Spider-Man is that he was into science and into like things that weren't cool then but are
Yeah.
cool now, and so it's
Yeah.
hard to make him not really cool. But they do he does a good job of playing him as a
I
like
think
kind of
I th-
socially
I
awkward
think it helps
person.
by having him in high school, where in the
Yeah,
previous he was like older and in college, or like an actual working adult. So it makes
yeah,
it, having him in high school, like you can still be into that tech stuff and still be considered dorky and nerdy.
yeah. And my wish came true with this movie when I found out, like, oh, it's gonna follow Miles Morales turning into Spider-Man. He's my second favorite Spider person behind Spider
I'm
Gwen.
starting to get into more of the Gwen comics, as you know.
Yes.
And I don't know, it's still up in the air for me and who I'm liking more. I think Miles is still winning a bit just because he was my first alternate Spider person, us outside of Peter, and I thought he was so cool. It's like, hold on, an African American kid is Spider Man who also is Hispanic. That's the
Yeah.
coolest combination ever. And I knew a lot of kids like that. So it was like me being the person I am, I'm also like, that's also really cool that that representation is getting in there as well.
Yeah, they get to see themselves. We've seen
Yeah.
ourselves enough. Let's let other people
Yeah.
get to see
Fun quick
themselves.
story. I was in my speech class, my final semester in college. I just graduated. One of the speeches was talking about representation in media, and the speaker asked, when was the first time you truly felt represented in a movie or in a TV show, and one of the kids, who happened to be a mix of Hispanic and African American, said, I truly did not feel represented until Into the Spider-Verse with Miles, because that's exactly what my family was like. And that was just like a wow moment for me. It's like, yeah, you'll get African American representation in there, but you don't always get something like that specific. But it seems to be a pretty common, at least in our hometown, it was a very common mix.
Yeah, I agree. So let's move
Let's
on to
actually talk
the
about the
logos.
logos.
Let's so this whole minute that we're talking about, that's just
Yeah, but
logos.
now he has background.
They're very cool
They
logos, though.
are. I actually have some very fun notes on them.
Yeah. So the Sony logo comes up. It opens with a lens flare, and the first thing that I saw
Mm-hmm.
in this, where you're like, oh, this is gonna be something different, was as it's the logo zooming in, it starts to turn into those
Yeah,
dots.
they reminded me of Band-Aid dots, which was,
Yeah.
that's, yeah, I actually wrote that down, like the 3D dots when it zooms in, it's the Band-Aid dots. I noticed the glare itself actually becomes the dots too. For those who don't know or aren't familiar, Band-Aid dots are the typical comic dots, and they're named by that from the way how comics and just art was printed back in the 60s. It's very common in pop art. Some very classic pop art has those dots, and it's a way to create shading and depth, and it's a very cool technique and a very simple technique that's still used in a lot of artists and tricks today.
Yeah, the technique was actually developed by Benjamin Day,
Yeah.
hence Ben
Yeah.
Day, in around 1879. So it's been almost 150 years of this,
Yeah,
technique
and
being
you can
around.
see it in a lot of classic art. Pointillism, that technique of art where artists will paint with in just single dots, and instead of blending colors together, they just mash two colors and dots right next to each other, and that's your eyes tricks them to blend. It's very similar to that, but in a much broader, not as detailed sense.
The other thing you'll hear printing wise it referred to as the four
Mm-hmm.
colors, like four color printing, and that's because the printing process uses the CMYK system of printing. So it's cyan, magenta, yellow, and key, the key being black. And they pretty much just print each color on top of each other, and that's how you get the different shades of what color you want. And they mix those three different percentages, so it'll be either 25, 50, 100, or 0 if it's left out.
Yeah, The other thing I noticed when it was zooming in and like when you notice the dots, it starts to kind of split into the traditional like 3D red and blue.
Yeah.
Like I noticed that and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Because I remember when the movie first came out, a bunch of people thought like when they weren't seeing it in 3D, they thought it was supposed to be 3D
Oh
because of
yeah.
the way the art style
Yeah,
was.
well, it splits into the four colors, the CMY. Well, it splits into the
I just
CMY.
noticed the two.
Oh
Yeah, I
yeah.
just noticed the two, but yeah, but I thought that was cool too. How like you can see almost a throwback to that. And one other thing I have is the closer it gets, when it's first zooming in, it very much looked like it was print to me, and
Yeah.
then the closer it gets, it looks less like print and more like when you get really close to a computer or like a screen, and you can see, especially on the older screen on the older TVs, you can see all of the many colored dots.
Yeah,
You know what I
it
mean?
was a really cool effect.
Yeah, so I put less print, more computer.
And then it zooms in, flashes, and then the flash turns into the Columbia torch.
Columbia
And
logo.
this one I think
Yeah.
is my favorite logo they do in the beginning there, because it flashes between like, oh, the different universes, like versions of Columbia.
So many. I think my personal favorite is the shooting cowgirl.
Oh yeah, that was an actual opening they used for the Bayou. Yeah, Cat Bayou movie from like really early on.
I could tell it was early animation. Like, you know me,
It's actually
I'm
not that
obsessed
early.
with all forms of animation.
1965. Um, later than
Yeah,
I thought.
it looked like 60s animation. Like, you know me, I love animation, especially
Yeah,
hand-drawn animation. And from just the way it was like drawn and moved and animated, I could tell I'm like that is like a 60s early animation type
style.
thing.
Yeah, it was really cool.
That is the style of it. And I think that's why it's a personal favorite because you know I love Looney Tunes and I love all of those. Like we grew up on those shows,
Yeah.
so weirdly, so that was very cool to me. This might be like
Is
a
there a
mini
banana on the
spoiler,
phone? There,
huh?
what? So, sorry, I was just panning through it again, and for one frame, a banana comes in. Like it looks like the banana just like blocks the woman off the stand, and it's just Columbia with a banana on the stand, just chilling there. Uh,
Sponsored by Dole.
um,
I
yeah,
didn't notice.
like
Is it really for only like one frame?
it's one frame. If when you're going through it frame by frame, there's a frame where it goes into the like the Columbia logo looks kind of written with like a calligraphy pen, and then it goes back to the normal logo. It twitches a bit, and then the banana appears, and then it comes back and twitches again. So apparently, in one universe, Columbia's main thing is a banana on a stand.
That's the Planet of the Apes universe.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going with. That's the planet. It's either that or Spider Ham's universe because
Yeah.
I could see Columbia's and Spider Ham's universe doing that.
And the other real life logo that they pull into the Columbia one that I noticed was the sun rays logo they use from 1976 to 1980.
Yes.
And that one appears behind the Cat Bayou gunslinger lady.
Yeah. It made a very cool effect. That whole sequence in particular reminds me of again kind of I was starting to say earlier. It reminds me of the glitch effect that like the spider people go through.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent. Like, oh, the different universes are like popping in and out. Which one's it pulling from?
Yeah, well, and like especially like how it would glitch is like I specifically think of like how Peter would glitch and like how his whole body would kind of deform.
Yeah,
So it just reminded me a lot of that. I'm like, that's such a cool way to like foreshadow the story you're about to see.
yeah, and then with the Marvel logo,
Yes.
this one it's very reminiscent of the current. It's the current Marvel or
Yes.
intro.
Then it glitches a bit. And I
Yeah,
actually wrote down one that I personally loved. It was really the only one that stood out to me. There's one switch where it's a spray paint shot.
Yeah,
Did you catch that one? And I thought
yeah,
how appropriate since we're about to see Miles' story.
yeah. I really liked that one. It was neat when they was glitching through with the
All the different. I didn't notice all of the ones. The spray paint one really caught my eye.
during the page flip. It was neat how like, oh, it's kind of flipping, but then you get like hints of these other Marvel logos
Mm,
as it's flipping through
that's
it.
very cool. Yeah, then I have
The Sony Pictures animation
Sony
one.
Pictures Ends.
This one does a couple glitches.
Yeah. I have two times written down that really stuck out to me when I was taking notes on this one. And at 43 seconds, if you notice, there's one of Miles's tags,
Yeah,
like right at the bottom,
yeah, I caught that
which
too.
I'm like, that's super cool. I thought I just saw it for like I imagined it for a second. And then a second after that at 44 seconds, it's kind of a return of the Bende dots in a way, but the dots themselves look almost three-dimensional.
Oh yeah, when they like explode.
Yeah, when it's like that mini explosion, I'm like, that looks awesome.
Yeah, it explodes into the next Sony Pictures one.
Yeah, I really liked that one.
And then that smashes into the Pascal Productions. Or Pictures, sorry. Pascal Pictures.
I didn't have any notes on that one.
I have a couple, just because it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting. So it's Amy Pascal's production company.
Okay.
She is the chairperson of the Motion Pictures Group for Sony Pictures. And she also was the Pictures was one of the production companies that also helped with Homecoming. So she's been kind of looking at helping with
yeah.
Spider-Man for Sony Pictures. But yeah, she's the head person or one of the head people of Sony Pictures Entertainment as
That's
a whole.
awesome.
Yeah, and that one flashes through real quick. You'll see her, and they also helped with or will be helping with Spider-Man: Far From Home.
Yeah.
And then the last one
That's awesome.
we got for the last couple of seconds is the Comics Code, approved by the Comics Code Authority stamp.
This is also the only logo with no glitches.
Oh yeah.
Or like
I didn't
no
even
real
pick
like
up on that.
effect to it.
Yeah, you're right. It just
Yeah,
zooms in,
I
zooms
I
out.
like yeah, it's just like here it is, which I thought was interesting. I don't know why they chose to do it that way. I don't know if it's cuz like you're about to watch a comic book.
I wonder if so right now that let's talk about the Comics Code Authority first. Do you have any notes on it?
Yeah, I only really wrote that it's the only one with the no glitch.
Okay, cool. I'll give you the background.
I do remember. Okay, hold on. I do remember when we were watching the commentary. I forget who said it, but one of them is like every comic lover's favorite thing, the Comics Code, or something like that. And I'm like, can't wait to hear about this.
Yeah, so the Comics Code Authority was founded in 1954 by the Comics Magazine Association of America. It was at a time when people were really worried about comics corrupting the youth and like what their effect was having on it. It was that, social
Think
morality.
of the children.
Yeah. It was that social
This does sound very
morality,
familiar.
policing. They were worried about all the scary things that's going to turn our children into violent sociopaths. And so instead of waiting for the government to step in and try to regulate them, comic book producers were like, okay, we're going to create this, we're going to self-regulate, this is going to get the stamp of approval. And then it was sort of a self-censorship, because then like distributors and comic shops would just refuse to stock anything that didn't have the stamp. And if someone was caught like stocking something that didn't have the stamp, they might get blacklisted. But the thing that was kind of crazy to me when looking into it was that it didn't really get abandoned until like the early 2000s.
Really?
Yeah, so 2001 was when Marvel was like, okay, we're going to start our own ratings and have our own way of like doing things. But then like DC and Archie and a couple other comic producers kept following it. And in 2011 was when DC and Archie were like, okay, we're going to stop using this as well, which was when it technically then became, a defunct thing that wasn't being followed anymore.
2011?
Yeah, so it's only been 8 years since this
That's
set of regulations.
have been like, nah, forget it. That's crazy.
Yeah, and so when it became functionally defunct, the IP rights were then bought up by the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, but they really only have the rights to the stamp and the logo. But yeah, it's really like it's similar. It was even more restrictive than like the ESRB for video games or the movie ratings.
That's that actually blows my mind. I had no idea they were around that long.
Yeah, and like I think later on they weren't followed as strictly, but there are some like really. I have the list up, and I figured we could go through it, look at it, and then we should keep an eye out throughout the rest of the movie and see if it
See
actually
if we can
does
find
follow it.
that's interesting. You'll have to point it out
Yeah, I'll see.
because that'll be cool.
There was during the animators commentary, they brought up like, oh yeah, we just stuck it up there, but there isn't actually like a way for it to to be like approved anymore because the board doesn't exist. So
I do kind of remember that. It almost with it having like no real effect or glitches on it, it almost feels like a joke in itself.
yeah,
Where it's like, yeah, we're not gonna do anything to this because you all know. Like, I don't know. It was very interesting to me. And I'm like, okay, I know that's significant somehow, but it's even almost more significant with the history behind it.
I'm gonna pull out some of the like ones that are kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some where it's like, okay, policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority.
Boy, are there a few comics nowadays that don't follow that one.
Yeah.
There are a few movies nowadays that don't follow that one.
In every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal punished for his misdeeds.
Ah.
This one's really interesting. So I'll give you 11 and 12 for the standards. Number 11 and 12 is the letters of the word crime on a comics magazine shall never be appreciably greater in dimension than the other words contained in the title, and the word crime shall never appear alone on a cover. Restrict in the use of the word crime in titles or subtitles shall be exercised. So they don't want crime being just like, your magazine title can't just be called crime.
That would be a weird I'd check it out, but that would be a weird magazine.
Yeah.
Like crime magazine. That's I don't know why, but the way like crime reminds me of how Mermaid Man would go evil.
Yeah.
It just kind of makes me think of that.
I think this one's the most crazy, and it's the first part of the general standards part B.
There's something crazier than the crime thing?
Yes.
Because that's pretty insane to me.
No comic magazine shall use the word horror or terror in its title. And I was reading somewhere that this was like targeted specifically at some of the top selling comics that were, I don't remember what they were called, but they specifically had that. So they like put that in to be like, okay, you can't sell that anymore because some people didn't like it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That one's okay. Yeah, that one beats the crime one. Serious? That's
Yeah. Other weird ones. Passion or romantic interest shall never be treated in such a way as to stimulate the lower and baser emotions. And then there's some codes for advertising materials. So liquor and tobacco advertising is not acceptable.
okay. That's fair.
Advertising for the sales of like weapons or fireworks are prohibited. Nothing aimed at like gambling.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's stuff that's like to try to prevent. Yeah, that makes sense.
Those seem more reasonable. The crime and the horror seem very strange.
Yeah,
And like, even considering the time period that this group was founded, because you said it was the 50s, right?
54. Yeah,
54. So it even the divorce thing, though nowadays seems like that's really weird. makes sense for that time period with how stigmatized divorce was
Yeah.
back then. The only other thing I have written on this page is overall, coolest intro ever.
Yeah. Oh, one more thing about the
Oh,
comics code. When you were saying like, oh, this doesn't have any glitches in it, I wonder if that had something to do with like the comic book legal defense funds, like to be able to use it, they had to make sure it didn't glitch, or if it was just like a creative purpose of like, hey,
yeah,
we're gonna treat this like,
it's official,
yeah,
even though it really does nothing or means nothing nowadays.
yeah.
That would be interesting to talk with like the creative team. Is like, was that like a legal thing or was it like a choice to do?
But yeah, this was a pretty cool intro.
Well, the thing is, like, this isn't even, I think, like, the official movie intro. These are just, like, the logos. These are just, the basic things you see in front of every movie. But what I really appreciated about this is I remember my first time seeing the movie, and when these logos came up, I'm like, oh, I'm, okay. Okay, we're gonna be in something different. Because most of the time when you see these movies, they're the basic standard logos. Every once in a while, they might have something kind of clipped in, but not most of the time.
Yeah, like
So,
the Disney Castle logo will sometimes change slightly depending on what movie you're in.
yeah, or like yeah, but most of the time, they're still very standard. They don't change that often. So, to see this and like have it be some of the most creative I've ever seen logo. I was actually excited to watch the logos for this podcast.
Yeah,
I'm never excited to watch logos. I'm like, oh, let's just skip through these. Or like, let's just get through them. Or like, I'll be getting popcorn or something and I'm watching for fun. It's like, no one cares about that. But I would actually like want to sit and like, no, we have to watch the logos. These are some of the coolest logos ever. I just thought that was so cool for this movie, like, or for the creative team to like put effort into that. It's like, we're gonna make these people want to see these logos. We're gonna have fun with them.
yeah. So, do you have any other notes for the minute?
No, those are the only ones I have, and my little spiel at the end there.
Cool. I think that will wrap it up for minute 1 of Spider-Verse Minute. We will, I was going to say see you guys next time, but we won't see you guys.
This is a podcast, Sean. There's no visual form with it.
We'll be back on Wednesday with some more logos and an intro to Spider-Man. Thanks for listening.
See you guys next time.
Bye.